I'm not going to read it in Arabic because it's kind of long. And then another story about another child, another infant who spoke. And then we'll take just few lessons from the hadith, inshallah. The companion of Jurayj. Jurayj was a man who was a abid. He is a worshipper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He took a monastery. It's a place of seclusion for the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sawma'a, they call it in Arabic. So he used to be in his monastery, and his mother came to him while he was praying, and she said, "Oh Jurayj." And then while he was praying, he said, "Oh my God, or my Lord, my prayer and my mother." And so he continued to do his prayer. And so she left. Next day, she came again, and he was again praying. And she called upon him. She said, "Oh Jurayj." And then he said, "Oh my Lord, my prayer and my mother." But then he continued praying without responding to his mother. And then the next day, the same thing happened. He was praying, his mother came and she called out to him, "Oh Jurayj." And he said, "Oh my Lord, my mother and my prayer." And he continued to pray. And thereupon his mother made a dua against him. She said, "Allahumma la tumithu hatta yanzur ila wajhi al-mumasat." Oh Allah, don't make him die until he looks at the faces of the prostitutes, evil women. So the children of Israel talked about Jurayj and how pious he is and how good of a worshipper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala he was. And there was a woman who was a prostitute, and she was so beautiful. She was an example of beauty. She said, "If you want, I can seduce him." And so she went to him and she tried to seduce him, but he did not turn to her. He ignored her totally. And so after giving up from Jurayj, she went by his monastery. There was a shepherd. He used to stay by his monastery. She went to that shepherd and she allowed him to come over her. And so he went over her and she became pregnant. And when she delivered the baby, she said that that baby is Jurayj's baby. She fabricated a lie against Jurayj. So they came to him, to his monastery. They took him out. They destroyed his monastery. And they start beating him up. And he said, "What is the matter with you? What is wrong with you? Why are you doing this to me?" And they said to him, "You committed adultery and fornication with this prostitute woman, and she gave birth to your child." And he said, "Where is that child?" So they brought the child. And then he said, "Let me offer to prayer. Let me pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." So he did his prayer. And when he finished his prayer, he came to the infant and he poked him in his stomach. And he said, "Who is your father?" And he said, "Fulan al-Ra'i, so and so, the shepherd is my father." So that was a miracle. The infant has spoken. So they turned to Jurayj. They started kissing him and touching him to get his blessings, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has just worked a miracle with his dua. And they said, "We are going to build your monastery out of gold." He said, "No, don't build it out of gold. Just build it as it was from mud." And so they did that. And then said, this is the story of Jurayj. Another story of another infant who spoke in the cradle was a young infant child, and he was suckling from his mother. And so a man came with a fancy ride, and he had very good clothes on. And his mother, thereupon, she said, "Oh Allah, make my son like this person." So the infant left the suckling. He took a look at the man. He reflected upon the man, and he said, "Oh Allah, don't make me like him." So he spoke. And then he went back to suckling from his mother. And so Abu Hurairah, he said, فَكَأَنِّي أَنظُرُ إِلَى رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ وَهُوَ يَحْكِي ارْتِضَاعَهُ بِإِصْبَعِهِ السَّبَّابَةِ. He said, as if I see the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mimicking his suckling with his index finger. That's how the Prophet ﷺ was telling the story. So, and he said, then a group of people came with a slave girl, and they were beating that slave girl, and they were saying, you committed adultery and you have stolen. They are accusing her of adultery and being a thief. And she used to say, Hasbi Allah wa ni'mal wakil. She used to say, Allah alone is sufficient for me, and He's an excellent guardian. That's what she used to say, and they used to beat her. So the mother of the child, she said, oh Allah, don't make my son like her. And so he left the suckling, he looked at the girl, and he said, oh Allah, make me like her. So, and then the woman started talking with her infant. A conversation took place between them. So she said, a man came and he had a nice ride and he was looking good and well dressed. I said, oh Allah, make my son like him. And you said, oh Allah, don't make me like him. And they passed by this slave girl and they were beating her. And they were saying that she's committed fornication and she stole. I said, oh Allah, don't make my son like her. And you said, oh Allah, make me like her. And then he said, the child spoke and he said, that man was a tyrant and an oppressor. And so I said, oh Allah, don't make me like him. And then they used to say that she committed adultery and she stole, but she did not commit adultery and she did not steal anything. And so I said, oh Allah, make me like her. This hadith agreed upon in Bukhari and Muslim. So now we just come to a few lessons, inshallah, from this hadith. It's a long hadith. Inshallah, we take few lessons. Now, Jurayj was in a seclusion, in a monastery. Now, being secluded from people is good only if mixing with people will introduce shar, evil and sins. Otherwise, if no shar or evil, it is better to mix with people, because the Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-mu'minu alladhi yukhaliqu an-nas wa yasbiru ala adahum khayrun min alladhi la yukhaliquhum wa la yasbiru ala adahum." A believer, he mixes with people and he is patient on their evil and their misbehavior, is better than a person who does not mix with people and he has no patience for them. So this is one point here. So if someone knows that he mixing with people, going to a certain place, his religion is going to be impacted, he is going to be suffering some kind of sins, it is better for him to stay away from that. The Prophet ﷺ said, a time will come when the best of wealth of a believer is that he will have a flock of goats or sheep and he will take them up to the mountain, escaping away from the people and their evil with his religion. He wants to save his religion. A time will come like that. Okay, then his mother, remember Jurayj, his mother made a dua against him. She said, oh Allah, don't make him die until he sees the faces of the prostitutes. So this is a great fitna. A man just looking at a woman could be a fitna for him. And looking at the face of a prostitute who likes to seduce others is a greater fitna. Because looking at her, she will allow him to do whatever he wants. So this was such a great dua against her son. And parents normally, they have a lot of compassion and pity for their children. But sometimes this compassion can be transformed. In a moment of anger, someone can turn against their own children and make dua against them. So we have to be very careful at any cost to avoid our parents making dua against us. Another benefit of this hadith is if our parents call upon us while we are praying, we need to respond to them. Except during the fard prayer. We do not respond to our parents when we are doing fard prayer. So when we are doing sunnah or nafl and our parents call upon us, then we have to reply to them. If our parents are understanding, and they know that if you tell them that you're praying, for example, if you are praying, your parents are calling upon you, for example, you can read aloud, or saying tasbih or takbir aloud, or doing nahnaha like in Arabic, clearing the throat, so that you let them know that you're praying. If they are understandable, then you can continue and make your salah, quick. Make it quick and respond to them. Otherwise, it's allowed for you to cut your prayer and respond to your parents. So this is another benefit of this hadith. Salatul Faridah, an obligation like Zuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha prayers, if you are praying and there's a necessity, then we can break that. Like for example, someone is about to fall to his death in a ditch, or in a well, or in a sea, or in a fire, or if a child is about to inflict a great harm on himself, then at that moment, we can break our fard prayer for this necessity. We talked about dua al-walid. If a parent make a dua against his child, and that dua has haqq, a right, they have the right to make that dua against you, then that dua could very well be accepted. So that has to be avoided at all costs. Few more benefits. Okay, Jurayj, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him this miracle because he used to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in ease. Allah knew him in his difficulty. He had a good relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was always a worshipper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When he fell in this difficulty, a woman came to seduce him, a beautiful woman, the most beautiful woman in her time. She came to seduce him. Allah saved him. Because not anyone can be saved from that. Somebody can be worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for so many times. A beautiful come and seduce him who forgets everything. But he was patient. He was patient. He was not seduced. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved Jurayj because of his righteousness, because of his relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also, this hadith indicates the patience of Jurayj, that he did not intend to inflict like revenge on the people, or make them build his monastery out of gold. He just told them, just build it for me the way it was, from mud. He was a content man. He went back to his life of contentment, and that tells you his character and how he was. Another benefit, this is a fiqhi, a little bit complicated issue, but I'm going to try to attempt this one. The hukum of walad zina. What is the ruling of a child that is born out of wedlock or out of the act of zina, like what happened in the story of Jurayj? So most of the scholars, they said that walad zina, a child that is born out of zina, will not be connected or claimed by the zani. This is because the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith, Al-waladu lil-firash wa lil-ahiru al-hajar. Al-walad, the child should be given to the household in which it was born, or in the bed in which it was conceived or born. In that household, they will have the legal right to the child. Lil-ahir, the adulterer, he should have nothing except the stone. So some of the scholars, they looked at this hadith in particular, and they said that a child that is born out of the zina act could be claimed by the adulterer if no one else claimed him. If no one else claimed that child, he could be connected, claimed, and associated with the adulterer. Because Jurayj asked that child, and he said, "Who is your father?" And he said, "My father is so and so, the shepherd." So they took that as an indication that an adulterer can claim the child or can be associated to him. But if there is someone to have a dispute about that child and claim the child, then the adulterer has no right to that child. So, and this is a smaller group of the scholars who said this. And the one who said this opinion, they said if someone is there, another person is there to claim the child, then it should not be claimed by the adulterer, nor connected, nor associated with him. And they said that it is better for the child to have a lineage from a father, from his biological father, than to be left without any lineage or without any name be called, he will be called after his mother. They needed someone to be connected to that child. So that is their rationale. So the last, just a few more points left, inshallah, and then we will conclude. The last story about that last child, he made a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He wanted to be like that pure, innocent slave girl. They were accusing her. She was oppressed. She was madluma. She didn't do anything wrong. And she also wanted to be like her because she said, Hasbi Allahu wa ni'mal wakil. Allah is sufficient for me and He is the best guardian. So this hadith indicates this is an ayah from ayat Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a miracle, a sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these miracles, they can happen to prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, also it will happen to someone like Jurayj. Jurayj was not a Nabi. He was just a Abid. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him a karama. He gave him a miracle. So it will happen to Salihin. People who are with Allah's side, they do the right thing and stay away from the bad things. So also this hadith indicates the importance of birrul walidain, to be good to our parents. A very, very important point to be brought from this hadith. So these are some of the points. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us to be from those who are dutiful to their parents. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from the people who love the weak and the oppressed, and to be people of tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله العظيم لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. جزاكم الله خير.